Once you start blaming yourself for deaths that aren't your fault, my friend, that's a slippery slope that you can't come back from. And trust me, I've seen it ruin a hell of a lot of good doctors, and I will not let it happen to you.
Scrubs is a comedy. That's how it presents itself. Fast jokes, absurd fantasies, slapstick humor, characters who feel more like cartoon exaggerations than real people. It's the kind of show you put on when you want to laugh, relax, and forget about your boss giving everyone Christmas cards that say, "Thanks for being part of the team," instead of bonuses this year. But somehow, in 22 minutes, it delivered one of the most emotionally devastating episodes in television history. Because in just over 20 minutes, Scrubs reminds you that beneath all the jokes, it's still a show set in a hospital, and sometimes, hospitals don't get happy endings. To be fair, it has done this multiple times. There are many episodes of Scrubs that are absolutely devastating, and I am positive a lot of you will disagree with me calling this episode the saddest. And that's okay. That's what makes this show so great. We have so many amazing episodes to choose from, and there is no right or wrong answer when it comes to your opinion. My Lunch isn't sad because it tries to shock you. It's sad because it slowly convinces you that everything is going to be okay, and then it takes that belief away, piece by piece. The tragedy hits in the middle of the episode after a happy, uplifting moment, which is different than other episodes like My Screw Up, which is extremely sad in its own right, but instead saves the sadness for the twist ending. My Lunch is the only time in the series where we see Dr. Cox, the sarcastic team-leading juggernaut he is, have a full breakdown. So when the final shot of his broken and weeping face is shown, it really hits hard. Sure, we see him get emotional other times in the series, like when he is at his brother's funeral, or when Carla leaves the hospital after having her baby, but none of them have the kind of heartbreaking devastation that Dr. Cox shows in My Lunch. The episode starts upbeat like basically every episode of Scrubs. JD is trying to get his mentor, Dr. Cox, a role in which he begrudgingly accepted and enjoys even though he will never let JD know, to eat lunch with him. Of course, Dr. Cox says no and explains to JD that they are not friends, they are co-workers, but JD just shrugs it off as sarcasm, which it of course is deep down. During lunch, JD heads to a local market to get some food, and of course who is also there shopping? Dr. Cox. Coincidence? Nope. As JD follows Dr. Cox around, they run into a former patient of theirs, a woman who tried to end her own life previously on the show. They both understand how fragile she is mentally, but at the same time, she is extremely frustrating and annoying. This will be very important later in the episode. She asks them if they want to eat lunch with her, but after some shenanigans, that does not end up happening. Back at the hospital, we learn that there are 3 separate patients waiting for transplants. This is where the main crux of the episode starts. 2 of these patients are on death's door, and without a transplant soon, they are sure to die. But one of these patients needs a kidney. He is sick and also desperate for a transplant, but he can make it another month or so without one. This patient is also someone that Dr. Cox really likes. They get along great, talking about things like who had the worst father. He means a lot to Dr. Cox, and he has promised him everything is going to be fine. Dr. Cox then gives a speech to the doctors explaining to them how important it is to him to save these 3 people. He is uncharacteristically hopeful and upbeat about this whole situation and truly believes they are going to pull it off. The next day, JD goes back to the market for lunch and ends up running into Jill again. She says she was hoping the guy who stood her up yesterday just got his days mixed up and would be there today instead. Of course, she knows this is nonsense, but she has nothing else to do. JD tries to avoid her, but she ends up running into him. They then proceed to have that lunch together she asked about the day before. She tells him about how many dates she has been stood up on, how she hasn't seen her therapist in a while, and it's obvious she is depressed. However, during the lunch, JD is bored and annoyed the entire time, and he's even a little rude to her, being sarcastic and outwardly frustrated. There is a B-plot to this episode in which Elliot and Carla are convinced Todd is secretly gay, and they try to get him to come out of the closet, which backfires horribly when he starts being inappropriate and gross towards the men at the hospital now too.
Nickhead, is that package for me? You know it is!
But I'm going to skip talking about this plotline as it really doesn't add anything to the main story, and honestly, it was one of the weaker little storylines of the show. We then see Dr. Cox talking to his patient again, and they infuse some more humor into this episode with a dream sequence where JD imagines them taking his kidneys. Scrubs kind of borrowed this tactic from Family Guy. When they want to show something completely outlandish that wouldn't make sense in the real world, they just do a cutaway gag. However, in Scrubs, they are usually in JD's head, although occasionally someone else in the show does get their own little gag sequence. Dr. Cox then has another little meeting with the doctors where they inform him 2 of the patients are quote-unquote circling the drain and won't last much longer. He tells them they need to keep these people alive until the organs come in, which leads right to the next big scene. A nurse grabs JD and asks him for help. A patient is unconscious and it appears it was from a drug overdose. JD goes into the room and who does he see? Jill. JD immediately feels immense guilt and starts to blame himself for this. Shortly later, Dr. Cox barges into the main room and excitedly tells everyone that the transplant organs are here, but sadly, these organs come from Jill. She passed away from what they still assume was an overdose since they found cocaine in her system. JD talks to her mom, and when she asks him if there was anything anyone could have done, he says no, but he thinks to himself that yes, he could have done something. Maybe if he had been more patient with her earlier, she wouldn't have overdosed. This puts him into a deep funk. They give everyone the transplants they needed, and then they quickly start to improve. Everyone looks good, and everything looks like it's going to work out. Dr. Cox is especially happy about this as he bonds more with his patient. He gives one of his very infrequent positive speeches thanking everyone for saving these people's lives, but he notices JD is not happy like everyone else. JD explains how he should have seen Jill was that depressed, and that it's his fault for her death.
I'm the reason she's dead.
This gets Dr. Cox to finally accept a lunch with him. During lunch, Dr. Cox explains to JD that you can't save everyone. All you can do is do your best, and that when you are not at the hospital, you can't be in doctor mode the whole time. It's too much to ask of someone. He tells JD,
Once you start blaming yourself for deaths that aren't your fault, my friend, that's a slippery slope that you can't come back from.
which does get him to perk up a little bit. But once they are back at the hospital, they find that all the transplant patients are failing. Dr. Cox immediately runs in to check on his patient, who says his feet are now numb. They are then informed that Jill did not die of a drug overdose like they thought.
She died of rabies.
Had they waited for the autopsy, they would have known this and not done the transplants, but Dr. Cox was too obsessed and 2 of the patients were so close to death that they went ahead with the operations without waiting. Dr. Cox is still hopeful, however, and tells everyone they know what they are doing and they can still save these people, so they get to work trying everything they can. Unfortunately, we see that over the next couple days, the 2 patients that were the sickest die from the rabies-infected organs. I really wish you could hear the music playing over this entire scene, because it's famous for how well it invokes emotion. If you want to hear it, listen to How to Save a Life by The Fray. Or of course, you could just watch this episode of the show. Dr. Cox is then sitting alone, depressed in the break room when JD comes in and tells him that he did the right thing. He says there are very, very few cases of rabies a year. He tells him he would have made the exact same call because without those organs, those patients would have died anyway. This seems to help Dr. Cox feel a little bit better. But of course, this wouldn't be the saddest episode if something else didn't happen. During this little break, their pagers go off and they run out of the room, right to Dr. Cox's patient's room, where he does everything possible to save his life as he passes on. This causes Dr. Cox to have a complete meltdown, one of the very few times we see him react like this. He even tells JD,
He wasn't about to die, was he? Could have waited another month for a kidney.
Dr. Cox then starts to leave the hospital when JD stops him and gives him the same speech he was given earlier. He tells him it wasn't his fault, and once you start blaming yourself for deaths, there's no coming back. To which Dr. Cox replies,
Yeah. You're right.
We then zoom in on JD's concerned face, and the episode fades to black. This scene is one of the most emotionally draining scenes on television. Seeing Dr. Cox this broken is devastating. He is the strong, sarcastic, unemotional leader of the show. If you haven't watched Scrubs, it's hard to put into words how impactful seeing him in this state really was. But it was also important for the character. Of course, we know he cares. He wouldn't have stayed a doctor in that hospital for 20 years if he didn't. JD wouldn't worship the ground he walks on if he didn't. But we as the viewer rarely get to see it at this level. Many emotional episodes deal with the loss after it happens. Characters mourn, they process, they try to move on. My Lunch shows you the moment hope dies. It shows belief turning into disbelief, confidence turning into shock, pride turning into guilt. This episode ends without comfort. And that's why My Lunch lingers. It doesn't devastate you with the twist, it devastates you with realism. It tells you that sometimes effort isn't enough, that preparation doesn't guarantee success, that you can do everything right and still lose. For a sitcom, especially one as silly as Scrubs, that's a brutal truth to confront. My Lunch isn't just the saddest episode of the show because people die. It's the saddest episode because for a moment, everyone truly believes they won't. And when that belief is taken away, nothing replaces it.